The Supreme Court ended its 2022-2023 term with a few seismic rulings that are sure to shake things up around the country. Just last week, the court decided that race-based admissions in higher education are unconstitutional and that it's okay to deny services to gay people under the guise of a religious freedom. How will these decisions trickle down and impact the everyday lives of folks like you and me? And perhaps more importantly, will these decisions stand the test of time? I'm Deborah Douglas, filling in for Andy Zopp. This is Chicago Newsroom 2.0, and we'll discuss it. But up first is my one-on-one conversation with Aisha Davis, board chair of Affinity Community Services. We're back with her after this.
This week on In the Money, I'm guest hosting for my mom to talk about the teen brain and money from a teen perspective. If you ever wondered what your kid gets out of spending money on clothes for online games, this episode is for you.
I usually get gift cards for the game. Expressing myself in game, wearing the outfits I would want to wear, but I wouldn't wear or couldn't wear in real life.
In the Money airs on Tuesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CAN TV Plus app.
As the LGBTQ community has continued to become more and more visible in recent years, there has been a push to make sure that all members of the community are seen. Today's first guest is chair of an organization devoted to elevating the voices and concerns of Chicago's queer Black women. What are the issues important to queer women of color? How are their voices being elevated? Aisha Davis, board chair of Affinity Community Services, is here to explain more. So tell us a little bit about Affinity.
Absolutely. So Affinity Community Services, or Affinity, is a social justice organization that is committed to serving the Black LGBTQ community of Chicago with a specific focus on Black women. Mm-hmm. We are about to celebrate 30 years in 2025, Ooh. So it makes us one of the oldest LGBTQ organizations in the country that focuses on Black issues specifically.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We often hear about Chicago being a welcoming place for the LGBTQ community. Is that true for Black women in the community?
I think that it's a mixed response, right? Okay. So when we look at the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois at large, we are considered what is a safe haven for LGBTQ plus folks in general. But like every other state and every other city in this country, we have a long-standing history of systemic issues such as racism and sexism. So all of the issues that face women, not just women, I'd say women and other people who are assigned female at birth. And when I say women, I include trans women in that too. And then when you look at issues facing Black folks, right, all of these different issues are compounded for queer Black women. And I think that when we're looking at what might be considered safer or not safe, Chicago is up there on the list in terms of places where I'd say that we're able to be our freest selves, but I would never say that it's a place that is, straightforwardly safe for queer Black women, because we have all the issues that we've seen around policing, around discrimination. And until we figure out a way to really uproot all of those deeply insidious issues, I don't know that there is a place like that in this country.
Yeah. Is there a really great place to be a queer Black woman in this country?
I would say that Affinity is a place.
Okay.
That's a really good place to be a queer Black woman in this country. And I'm going to be honest, there are enclaves, there are areas where there are folks who have settled, and you just kind of build up that community, you build up that chosen family, and you make the space safe for yourself. There's a lot of that happens within queer Black communities, as in Black communities at large, right? We find ways to keep us safe. And for queer folks, it just means that there's another layer of that.
Yeah, so in the city of Chicago, what are some of those safe havens? Like, is there an area of town?
It depends.
Okay.
I would say that, so for example, with Affinity, we partner with a lot of other organizations that might not necessarily be based on the South Side, but when we partner with those organizations, we make sure that we show up in those spaces in a way to keep our folks safe. So if we have an event that is on the North Side, right, our offices are on the South Side, they've always been on the South Side, they always will be, because that's where we are. But if we're going north, we know that we need to go in numbers. We know that we need to make sure we're working with trusted partners. There's a lot of vetting that Affinity does on behalf of the community to make sure that we're bringing people into a space that is not only welcoming, but also affirming of who they are.
So paint a picture for me when you say go in numbers. What does that look like? Where are you going? Give me a real life scenario.
Absolutely. I can give you two if you want. So the first one I'll go to is one of our most recent events. It was a family barbecue, which was our second year doing this, it was back in June, and it was something that we came up with because we felt very disconnected as a community. As I'm sure you know, there are just things that you don't get via Zoom, right, when you're trying to meet with people. And what we did is we went to the Dan Ryan Woods. We had a huge event where we had over 100 people show up. It was family friendly, so there were things for kids, there were things for adults. We had a DJ, we had free food, and we made sure to not only talk about the issues that we're facing as a community, but also really provide that space for joy, right? I think that a lot of times, especially being on the board of an organization like Affinity, people want to talk about the hardships, but there is something so necessary about joy in any kind of liberation work that we're doing. So that was one of the reasons why we had the barbecue. We have programming, and then we have fun things like that so that you can really show up and take off that armor that we kind of have to wear every day.
I love that.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court recently ruled that it's okay to deny services to the LGBTQ community under the First Amendment's religious freedom provision. So what is Affinity's reaction to that?
You know, Affinity, like I believe every other LGBTQ-focused organization in this country, is really disheartened by this news. This decision is one that kind of flies in the face of more recent decisions like the Obergefell case that happened a few years ago. We, as a community, as queer folks, right, I won't even say as Black folks, we are seeing this situation where rights are being rolled back. And the threat of that started when we saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade last year with the Dobbs decision. Justice Thomas did a really good job of highlighting the, I guess, trajectory of how these rights could be rolled back by specifically naming cases like Lawrence and Obergefell, which the first took away laws that criminalized same-sex relationships, and the second actually legalized same-sex marriage. And so to have a Supreme Court justice specifically name those when they aren't even at issue in the case, it gave us a preview or a taste of what's to come. The really concerning part, though, is that creating this First Amendment right to carve out who you serve based on your religious freedoms or beliefs means that anyone who claims to have a firmly held belief against serving Black folks, against serving queer folks, against serving trans people, can then deny those services. So for queer Black women or other queer Black people, it means that we can now be turned away from services just by being who we are.
How is Affinity processing the ruling, and how does this dictate your activities going forward?
I'm going to be honest, in our group text, there was at least a day of just frustration because this decision came out the day after the affirmative action case did. So it felt like a 1-2 punch for us of having these rights rolled back by a government that's supposed to protect us, right? And so there was some space that we kind of took to internally process what this means, how we can show up for our community. And I think going forward, what we want to make sure is that we're educating folks around what this does mean, what this can look like, right? So the same way that we've seen this wave of really hateful legislation that's coming up across the country, this is just one more in that list. So in the city of Chicago, we have certain protections that are in place. We want to make sure our community knows that and what can keep them safe, regardless of what the Supreme Court says. So what we're thinking about is how to make sure that our programming is reflective of where we currently stand policy-wise, but also, again, creating that space where people feel comfortable being themselves and don't have to worry about that harshness and that hatred hitting them there.
Yeah, because it's soft girl summer, right?
Exactly. We want to make sure we have that space. And it's honestly, I'm laughing because there are so many ways that when I think about the really hateful things coming up across the country, a lot of it is specifically targeting people and their appearance, how they look, how you show up in a space. And being a soft girl or trying to have a soft girl summer, I want to be able to wear what's comfortable. I want to get my nails done. I want to do things that feel affirming to me as who I am. And we've had states and cities and even some areas in the state of Illinois try to block people from being able to do that. And I personally feel like trying to take away someone's ability to live in their fullness, to live in their authenticity, it goes beyond just trying to defend a right.
Yeah.
If you were to put up someone's First Amendment right against my right to just exist, I'm going to pick me every time.
Absolutely. What has the response been from the queer women that you work with to the ruling?
You know, a lot of people are confused about how this carve-out was made, because one of the things that I think the Supreme Court has been doing with some of these decisions is saying that they're carving out a specific niche around something. So this conversation around, for example, the 303 decision is saying that it's only for companies that offer specific or specified services, right? And so they're trying to whittle it down and say that it limits things, but the problem is that they forced a wedge into this right that we thought that we were okay with. So the reaction that I've seen has kind of ranged from people saying, well, it doesn't matter if I'm not trying to find someone to build a website for me. But then I have to remind people, one of the first cases we saw come up around this issue was that Masterpiece Cake case.
Right.
Where we're trying to figure out if you can have a cake made for you for your same-sex marriage. If it can go from a cake to a website, I can see it going to a clothing store.
It can go anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. Aisha, you are so knowledgeable. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely. We'll be back with today's roundtable discussion right after this short break.
This week on our spring season finale of Change Agents, a Chicago organization that is working tirelessly to support families in underserved communities who have been impacted by autism. We are thrilled to share their story and their incredible work. Tune in this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, stream Change Agents on cantv.org, or download the CAN-TV Plus app. I look forward to seeing you.
Recent decisions by the Supreme Court to end affirmative action programs and redefine religious freedom have pushed us closer to an inflection point over some of the most divisive issues in the nation. How did we get here? And what do these decisions mean for the daily lives of everyday Chicagoans? Well, to help us break everything down are today's roundtable participants, Corli Jay, a reporter for Crane Chicago Business, Matt Simonette, the executive editor of the Windy City Times, and Alden Loury, data projects editor at WBEZ. So let's start with affirmative action. What was that all about? Or what was the question the Supreme Court was asked to decide?
I think the question was, can race be considered in college admissions? And there were kind of two cases, one from Harvard University, a private institution, and then one from the University of North Carolina, a public institution. And I think the factors they were considering were slightly different in both those cases, but at its core was this question of, should we have race-conscious admissions policies?
Yeah, and what did they decide, and how did they do that?
They decided that using race as consideration violates the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution. So essentially saying that affirmative action as we've known it is over, that it's unconstitutional.
Did did invoking the Equal Protection Clause surprise any of you?
No.
I mean, the Equal Protection Clause is, is the backbone of essentially preventing discrimination on the basis of race, which is what folks were arguing in their challenges to affirmative action at these two institutions. So the fact that the Supreme Court evoked it didn't surprise me. And I suppose there's been, for years, affirmative action has been under scrutiny, and so you just figured it was perhaps maybe just a matter of time before something like this happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Corli?
No, I just agree. Like, it's obviously racist and tone deaf, and it's not taking into consideration the history and why affirmative action is in place in the first place.
Yeah. Why is it in place in the first place?
Well, because our colleges and universities, particularly our most elite colleges and universities, are very white and increasingly very Asian, but not very many Black and Latino students are making it into those institutions. And as the University of North Carolina argued in its defense of this affirmative action policy, diversity is, it's a value that they cherished and they wanted to employ. And I think in Justice Sotomayor's dissent, she talked about, the value of diversity and how that has been part of what has sustained affirmative action and the argument for affirmative action all these years, and that the majority of the court was essentially kind of tossing that out the window in this particular decision.
I guess I asked the question because the assumption is that affirmative action is designed to help underrepresented groups, but it seems like it's really the opposite. It's really designed to help the people who can't make their way to finding these people, surfacing these people, and inviting them into these, in this case, educational spaces. So it just seems like the way that it's framed is just the opposite of what it really is.
Right. That's an interesting point. I would argue that affirmative action does kind of help them a lot, because when you look at the spaces, as he was saying, it's like you want to have this diversity in these historically white spaces, and it's helping you to kind of build empathy for communities, and it's kind of eradicating these racist spaces and creating these hubs. You know, so affirmative action can be beneficial to the white population as well as Black and Latino.
Yeah.
There's a worldview that I think is created by people being in spaces, and I think that diversity and the value of diversity is felt not just by the white students, but it's felt by students of color as well. But having an opportunity to share the same space, develop relationships, and to break down what may have been kind of stereotypical thinking in terms of what these folks are like and what communities come from and so on and so forth. I can remember when I was in college, there was a couple of white kind of classmates, if you will, who lived in the same dorm, who literally said, like, this is the first time I've ever actually met an African American person, and so there was value, I think, across the board in what you learn.
I totally agree, and it's kind of scary, you know, that they're eradicating this, and that being their experience, that being the first time they experience, you know, an encounter with a Black person, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen when they go out into the professional world, because they were like not around, didn't have this diversity around them when they were in school?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, isn't there a lot of empirical data to suggest that more diverse spaces are more productive and more creative and just better?
Yeah, there's a range of experience,
Right.
In terms of like practical living experience, perspective that you gain. And I think workplaces, universities, institutions in general are made better when you have a more full and complete, you know, kind of view of the world at your disposal.
Yeah, we were talking before we actually came on stage, and we talked about the gauntlet that certain underrepresented groups of people have to run even to get to the point of entering college. You have to overcome zip code discrimination. You have to overcome the maternal mortality rate, the infant mortality rate. It's so much stuff you have to go through, and then you have to perform above and beyond. And then it's sometimes, not every time, enter a program that is really designed to help people not think too hard about doing the right thing. It boggles the mind. So based on what you know, either by empirical data or personal experience, do you think this decision will move us closer to a diverse, equitable society? Or, you know, what outcome do you think will happen with this?
Like I stated earlier, I think that it's going to create just like more hubs for us to become more separate, I should say. But what's interesting, I spoke to a professor at Northwestern, Alden Loury, and he said that this actually doesn't affect 95% of students, right? It's really the more, you know, prestigious colleges like, you know, the Harvards, the Princetons, that will see this. But most Black and Latino students don't use affirmative action with the schools they're going in. But I would hope that I will see more in investing in PBIs, HBCUs, seeing more students kind of consider that with their college decisions with this affirmative action decision.
So break down for the audience what a PBI is.
I'm sorry, that's a predominantly Black institution, you know, like Chicago State, my alma mater. We want to see more funding going to these institutions. You know, we just saw Chicago State go on strike, and, you know, they're not getting a lot of funds. And we want to see that kind of trickle down in that kind of way. I feel like that could be a benefit of this.
Okay. And I guess my other question is, when you talk about separating or being more either self-segregating or being pushed to segregate, I don't want to gloss over that. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I've heard arguments either way.
I think that it could be both bad and good. I have a quote here from Mayor Johnson that I thought was very important. He said, through these inequities will come opportunities for organizing and excellence in the face of struggle. right? So we kind of see this in like with Jim Crow. We saw kind of the strength of our economics as the Black community when we were segregated, right? So we can probably see, like I said, the strengthening of these HBCUs and PBIs, but we also have to worry about these other hubs we have, like white supremacy kind of like congregating and building in these spaces that is kind of worrisome.
Yeah.
I think there certainly this conceivably will lead to, Black students who could have gone to Harvard through an affirmative action program, who may now choose Howard, or go to some other prestigious place. I figure if you're in a conversation at some of these elite universities, you're probably going to be able to find somewhere to go.
Some elite place to land.
Somewhere to land, yeah. I still say though that there are. I mean, I got into the University of Illinois through an affirmative action program. So I think if it, now right at this point, we're only talking maybe perhaps about elite institutions, but I think if this decision essentially is going to cast a shadow over affirmative action programs across the board, ultimately, I do think there's going to be a loss. And by that, folks who would have been going to some schools may find a different option or alternative. There'll be folks maybe going to community college or other more affordable options, and they'll still get a decent, solid college education. But will they get a college education to compete? And I'm talking specifically about Black and Latino students, to compete with their white counterparts who are going to be going to Harvard, who are going to be going to Yale and some of these other places, or even the University of Illinois. And because there's already an uneven playing field, which makes this whole decision really kind of crazy to begin with, right? We're talking about inequity in these elite institutions benefiting people of color who are disadvantaged outside of those spaces tremendously. And the whole reason why we created this thing to begin with was to help even that playing field. So I think the arc of history is going to ultimately say, maybe this was a decision that was, by the letter of the law, but perhaps in the spirit of what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of equity and justice and fairness, I think we're missing the mark.
Have you heard the conversations that suggest that the onus is on students themselves to tell their story of the impact of race on their lived experience?
Yeah, I want to say I think one of the justices in the majority on this decision talked about there's still an avenue for race to be considered in these decisions and these choices that universities make, and a student can reflect upon the impact. And perhaps that will be a way that folks can still lean on that. I don't know, I think Justice Sotomayor said it was like lipstick on a pig or something like that in that nature. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about this in the last segment too, about the court decision on making prioritizing religious freedom over LGBTQ rights. So what was happening in the case before the court?
What had happened there was a graphic designer in Colorado had essentially challenged law in that state that protected against discrimination against LGBTQ plus folks. And so despite the fact that she had not yet actually opened a business and had not been asked to design any kind of material for a same-sex couple.
Like it literally was not her business.
Right. This whole thing was hypothetical. And so the court took up this case and essentially said that her freedom of speech was being trounced on by this law that was in place in Colorado, even though there wasn't a moment where her speech had actually been trounced on, where she had not been asked to do anything. The whole thing was a performative thing in order to challenge that law.
So, I mean, I can guess the answer to this, but do you think this is a win for the First Amendment?
Not in the
or is it a loss for the LGBTQ community?
It's actually a huge loss. The Windy City Times today published a very good column by one of our contributors by the name of Lisa Keene. She's out in Massachusetts, and she really laid out how this is a loss for the community. And what will happen here is that organization after organization who are against LGBT rights are going to start poking at this as much as they can. And then also what you're going to see are just people across the country will think that this is a license to discriminate. There was an incident in Traverse City, Michigan, where a person put up a sign on her beauty parlor saying, if you're not a man or a woman, i.e. if you're trans or gender nonconforming, you're not welcome here. And it said, go to a dog grooming salon instead. So
that's dehumanizing.
Yeah,
literally.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what this means is really that if you are a same-sex couple, you can't go. Can't go to looking for a graphics designer and without the fear in the back of your head that they can discriminate against you if they want to.
The flip side of that horrific story is that hasn't that woman been slapped with a lot of inspections or investigations?
I believe so.
I think karma is biting her. In the
Yeah,
back.
yeah. I know she had to take it was posted online, and I know she had to make herself disappear from being online, if I remember right.
Yeah. So what are you hearing from the community? And this question is for all of you. What's the zeitgeist in the community right now?
I think it is just not knowing where this is going to go. I mean, the LGBT community is great at organizing. I'm confident that they'll have, that some kind of plan will fall into place.
I hope so. It seems like for all of the communities of interest we've discussed today, it's always sort of reacting to what's happening, whereas the opposition seems like they're playing this long game and they know what they're going to do like 10 steps out.
Right, and I know that's something I've always wanted to see the LGBT community be better at. And I think you can see that on on the left side of the political spectrum by and large.
Yeah, it was so interesting to me that happened during Pride Month. Like it was just like so symbolic, right?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
Yeah. There's been there was the great year of 2015 where gay marriage was approved right before we had Pride. And it was this wonderful moment. But there have been other years where we get this awful news. The decisions always come out at the end of June, right around Pride. So we're destined to get many years. We're destined to get bad news. We saw this. We saw this coming.
Absolutely. So that's where we'll have to leave it. This has been a very enlightening discussion today. I thank each of you for making the time, and we look forward to inviting you back.
Hi, I'm Ryan G. I'm the host of Tweenies. This week on Tweenies, we'll be talking about foster care with a special guest, my mom.
There's a lot of different reasons why kids are taken away from their parents.
You can catch my show Friday nights, 7 o'clock on CanTV 19, cantv.org, and the new CanTV Plus app.
If all this seems daunting and too big to fathom, let's remember we've all been here before. The fight for civil rights and social justice is as old as this nation. It is as foundational as the idea of democracy, and democracy only works in full when all of our rights are protected and embraced. I look to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent on the affirmative action decision as encouragement and an invitation. So in her words, I leave you with this. The best that can be said of the majority's perspective is that it proceeds, ostrich-like, from the hope that preventing consideration of race will end racism. But if that is its motivation, the majority proceeds in vain. I'm Deborah Douglas, filling in for Andrea Zopp. This has been Chicago Newsroom 2.0, and I wish you all a good night. And as Andy always says, be well and well informed.